The bank manager looked the old black man directly in the eyes and told security to throw him out. But less than 10 minutes later, the same woman was literally begging him not to close his accounts. Before we begin, comment your city and what time it is right now, because this story starts with humiliation in front of an entire bank lobby. But what happens next sends panic through the entire building. It was a busy Friday afternoon. Wealthy clients everywhere, million-dollar accounts, armed security guards near every entrance. And when an elderly black man quietly walked into the bank, carrying a worn envelope in his hands, nobody imagined he was worth more than almost everyone inside combined. Especially not the branch manager who decided he didn't belong there. The downtown bank tower stretched high above the crowded city streets, its giant glass windows reflecting afternoon sunlight across expensive cars parked outside the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere felt cold, polished, and designed for wealthy clients. White marble floors reflected bright ceiling lights, while customers in expensive suits moved between private banking offices and investment desks carrying luxury briefcases and coffee cups. Digital screens displayed stock market updates, interest rates, and advertisements promising exclusive services for premium members. Security guards stood near the entrance with crossed arms, carefully watching everyone who entered the building, while quiet piano music played softly through hidden speakers overhead. Everything about the place screamed money, status, and power. Then the front doors slowly opened again. An elderly black man stepped quietly into the lobby, carrying a worn brown envelope tucked carefully beneath one arm. He looked somewhere in his 70s now, dressed simply in an old dark coat and faded shoes worn from years of use. His gray beard looked neatly trimmed, and despite the exhaustion visible in his face, there was still quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. He paused briefly inside the lobby, calmly looking around the crowded bank, before slowly walking toward the teller line. Several customers glanced at him briefly, before immediately looking away again. To most people inside the building, he looked invisible, like someone who didn't belong in a place designed for wealthy people. Near the teller counters, two younger employees quietly exchanged looks after noticing him approach the line. One of them smirked slightly while whispering something under her breath. Across the lobby, the branch manager, Cynthia Reynolds, stepped out of a private office carrying investment folders while greeting wealthy clients with polished, professional smiles. She wore an expensive gray business suit, diamond earrings, and the confident expression of someone used to controlling everything around her. Employees immediately straightened when she walked by, and the moment her eyes landed on the elderly man quietly waiting near the back of the teller line, her expression changed instantly. The elderly man waited patiently while customers ahead of him completed transactions involving wire transfers, investment accounts, and business loans. Around him, wealthy clients moved freely through private offices, receiving warm greetings and immediate attention from bank employees. But each time the old man slowly stepped closer toward the teller counter, the atmosphere near the front desk grew noticeably colder. Finally, after several minutes, he reached the counter. A young teller forced a thin smile without hiding the impatience in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked quickly. The old man carefully placed the worn envelope onto the marble counter. "I'd like to speak with someone regarding access to one of my business accounts." The teller glanced briefly at the envelope before looking back at him. "Business account," she repeated. The old man nodded calmly. "Yes." The teller's eyes moved slowly over his old coat and worn shoes again before she asked, "Do you have the account number?" The elderly man carefully searched through the envelope while several impatient customers behind him sighed loudly. His hands trembled slightly from age as he unfolded several papers. "One moment," he said softly. A businessman waiting behind him checked his expensive watch and muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." The teller looked visibly irritated now. "Sir, if you're just trying to withdraw money, the ATM outside may be easier." The old man looked up calmly. "It's not a withdrawal." "Then what exactly are you trying to do?" she asked sharply. Before he could answer, Cynthia Reynolds slowly approached the counter after noticing the delay. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked coldly. The teller lowered her voice slightly. "He says he needs access to a business account." Cynthia's eyes moved slowly over the elderly man's appearance. The old coat, the faded shoes, the worn envelope. And immediately, she decided exactly who she believed he was before seeing a single document. Cynthia stepped beside the teller station with a polite smile that barely hid the judgment in her face. "Sir," she said carefully, "our business banking division generally works with scheduled corporate clients." The old man nodded politely. "I called earlier this week." Cynthia glanced toward the teller, who quietly shook her head. Cynthia immediately looked back toward him. "I don't see any appointment under your name." The old man slowly pulled several folded documents from the envelope and slid them gently across the counter. "I was instructed to bring these." Cynthia barely glanced at the paperwork before pushing it back slightly with 2 fingers. "Sir," she said quietly but firmly, "this branch handles high-value financial accounts." Nearby customers immediately started paying attention now. Several people slowed near the lobby entrance, while a businessman behind the old man smirked quietly under his breath. The elderly man remained calm. "That's why I'm here." Cynthia let out a short laugh. "With all respect, I think there may be confusion regarding the kind of services offered at this branch." The humiliation became public instantly. Nearby customers openly listened now, while the teller behind the counter avoided eye contact completely. But the old man still stayed calm somehow through all of it. "You haven't even looked at the documents," he said softly. Cynthia crossed her arms lightly. "People cannot simply walk into a corporate banking office demanding access to business funds." The old man quietly placed one hand over the envelope. "Interesting." Cynthia frowned immediately. "What's interesting?" The elderly man slowly looked around the polished bank lobby. How quickly people decide who deserves respect inside buildings built entirely around money. The sentence landed heavily in the silence around the counter. Several nearby customers visibly reacted, while even the teller looked uncomfortable now. But Cynthia's pride had already taken over. "Sir," she said sharply, "if you continue disrupting clients, I'll have security escort you outside." The old man calmly looked at her for several long seconds. "I'm only asking you to check the account." But Cynthia had already stopped listening. The atmosphere near the teller counters had spread across the entire lobby now. Customers openly watched the confrontation, while security guards near the entrance slowly approached after hearing Cynthia call for assistance. The elderly man remained standing quietly beside the counter, holding the worn envelope against his chest, while Cynthia looked at him with visible irritation. "Sir," she said firmly, "this branch serves serious financial clients." The old man looked directly at her. "And you've already decided I'm not one." Cynthia gave a cold professional smile. "I'm saying there are procedures." The old man nodded slightly. "Procedures usually involve reading documents before humiliating someone publicly." Several nearby customers visibly reacted after hearing that sentence. One older woman near the waiting area quietly shook her head, while a younger employee behind the counter looked deeply uncomfortable now. But Cynthia's ego had already gone too far to stop. "Security!" she called again. 2 guards approached beside the elderly man. One of them looked hesitant after noticing his age. "Sir," the guard said softly, Perhaps it's best if you leave for today." The old man slowly turned toward him. "Young man," he said quietly, "I opened my first account with this bank before you were born." The sentence caused the guard to pause briefly. Nearby whispers spread quickly through the lobby. "What's happening? Did he try to scam them? They're throwing him out." Cynthia folded her arms tighter now. "We are done here." The old man quietly sighed before picking up the envelope from the counter. But just as he turned slightly away, one younger teller finally glanced down at the paperwork still partially exposed inside the envelope. Her expression immediately changed. "Wait," she whispered softly. Cynthia frowned. "What now?" The teller slowly picked up one document with trembling hands. Her eyes widened instantly. Then all color disappeared from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. And suddenly, the entire atmosphere inside the bank changed. The young teller stared at the document like she couldn't believe what she was reading. Her hands visibly trembled, while Cynthia's irritation slowly shifted into confusion. "What is it?" Cynthia snapped impatiently. The teller swallowed hard before carefully turning the document toward her. "Ma'am," she whispered nervously, "you need to see this." Cynthia grabbed the paper quickly, clearly expecting some mistake or fake document. But the moment her eyes landed on the account information, her expression completely changed. Silence spread instantly across the lobby. The paper showed corporate ownership records tied to multiple investment groups, property holdings, and financial trusts connected to the bank itself. Numbers filled the page. Massive numbers. Cynthia's face slowly lost color, while nearby employees watched nervously. The elderly man stood quietly, holding the envelope against his chest, completely calm, while panic slowly spread around the teller counter. "This," Cynthia whispered softly. "This account can't be right." The teller looked terrified now. "It is right." Cynthia quickly flipped through additional papers. More accounts, more investments, more holdings, connected directly to the bank's largest corporate clients. Then she reached the final document. Her breathing stopped for a second after reading the signature at the bottom. The old man standing in front of her wasn't just another client. He was one of the original financial partners who helped save the bank decades earlier during a major collapse. Nearby customers openly stared now, while whispers spread rapidly across the lobby. Cynthia slowly lifted her eyes toward the elderly man. "Mr. Whitaker?" The old man nodded once quietly, and in that moment, the branch manager realized she had just publicly humiliated one of the most powerful clients connected to the entire bank. The entire bank lobby fell into complete silence after Cynthia read the final document. Moments earlier, she stood confidently beside the teller counter, ready to throw the elderly man out of the building. Now her hands visibly shook while holding paperwork connected to accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nearby customers openly stared toward the counter, while whispers spread rapidly through the marble lobby. "Who is he? What's happening? Why does she look terrified?" The young teller behind the counter looked pale now, clearly realizing she had witnessed something career-ending unfold in real time. Cynthia slowly lifted her eyes toward the elderly man again, but this time, she no longer looked at him with annoyance. She looked at him with panic. "Mr. Whitaker," she said carefully, her voice suddenly softer. The old man calmly folded his hands over the worn envelope. "Yes?" Cynthia glanced quickly back down at the documents again, like she hoped she misunderstood the numbers. But everything was there in front of her. Corporate trust accounts, property investments, long-term financial partnerships connected directly to the bank's largest investors. One signature from the old man could move enormous amounts of money, out of the institution overnight. And worst of all, she had just humiliated him publicly in front of an entire lobby full of customers and employees. One of the security guards slowly stepped backward now, while nearby tellers openly stared at Cynthia, waiting to see what she would do next. The old man remained completely calm somehow through all of it. No anger, no shouting, just quiet disappointment. And somehow that calmness made the situation even more painful for everyone watching. Cynthia finally forced herself to speak again. "Sir, there appears to have been a misunderstanding." Several customers quietly reacted after hearing the sudden change in her tone. Moments earlier, she threatened to remove him from the building. Now she sounded desperate not to offend him further. The elderly man looked around the lobby slowly. "Interesting," he said softly. Cynthia swallowed hard. "Sir?" The old man calmly glanced toward the security guards standing nearby. "A few minutes ago," he continued quietly, "I was apparently disrupting your clients." Silence spread heavily across the bank again, because everyone understood exactly what he meant.
Nothing about him changed. The only thing that changed was the amount of money people discovered he controlled. The atmosphere inside the bank had completely transformed now. Employees who barely looked at the elderly man earlier suddenly stood perfectly straight behind their counters, while nearby customers openly watched the scene unfold with shock written across their faces. Cynthia carefully stepped around the counter now, trying to regain control of the disaster growing inside the lobby. "Mr. Whitaker," she said nervously, "perhaps we should continue this conversation privately in my office." The old man looked at her calmly for several seconds before answering softly. "Why?" Cynthia froze briefly. "Sir?" The elderly man slowly looked around the marble lobby filled with wealthy customers and silent employees. "You seemed very comfortable discussing my business publicly a few minutes ago." The sentence hit the lobby hard. Several nearby tellers lowered their eyes immediately, while even the security guards looked embarrassed now. Cynthia forced a tight smile. "Sir, I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding regarding your accounts." The old man nodded slightly. "You apologized after reading the numbers." Silence followed instantly, because deep down, everyone standing there understood the truth. If the old man truly had been poor, the humiliation would have continued without hesitation. One older customer seated near the waiting area quietly shook his head. "That's cold," he muttered under his breath. The young teller who first discovered the documents looked visibly emotional now. She kept glancing toward the elderly man like she felt ashamed for staying silent earlier. But Mr. Whitaker never raised his voice once. He simply stood there calmly holding the same worn envelope while the bank around him slowly collapsed into panic and embarrassment. Cynthia quickly motioned for the security guards to step away while several senior employees hurried nervously out of nearby offices after hearing whispers spreading through the branch. The atmosphere inside the bank no longer felt powerful and controlled. It felt unstable, nervous, fragile. Cynthia looked toward the elderly man, almost pleading now. "Mr. Whitaker, please allow us to correct this situation." The old man quietly adjusted the old coat hanging from his shoulders before answering softly. "Correct what, exactly?" Cynthia struggled to answer immediately, because the real damage wasn't paperwork. It wasn't a transaction issue. It was the way the entire building treated him before knowing who he was. "You saw an old black man with worn shoes," Mr. Whitaker continued calmly, "and immediately decided he didn't belong in your bank." Nearby customers listened carefully now, while several employees looked deeply uncomfortable hearing the truth spoken out loud. Cynthia lowered her eyes briefly. "Sir, that was never my intention."
The old man gave a small, tired smile. "Intentions are easy," he replied softly. "Character is revealed by behavior." The sentence spread across the silent lobby like weight pressing down on everyone inside. Several younger employees visibly looked ashamed now, while the security guards completely avoided eye contact. Mr. Whitaker slowly looked around the expensive marble building. "Funny thing about money," he said quietly. "People think it changes human value." Then he calmly lifted the envelope slightly in one hand. But apparently, it only changes how fast people start showing respect. The bank lobby remained completely silent as Mr. Whitaker slowly gathered the documents back into the worn envelope he carried through the doors earlier that afternoon. Around him, wealthy customers and nervous employees watched every movement carefully, while Cynthia stood frozen beside the counter, visibly terrified about what might happen next.
The same man she nearly had removed from the building moments earlier now held enough financial power to shake the entire branch. But despite everything, Mr. Whitaker never raised his voice once. He calmly slid the final document into the envelope before looking toward Cynthia one last time. "Do you know the saddest part of all this?" he asked softly. Cynthia swallowed hard but said nothing. The elderly man glanced slowly around the marble lobby. "Nothing about me changed." Silence spread heavily through the building again. Several employees lowered their eyes immediately because everyone understood exactly what he meant. He was the same man, standing in the same clothes, carrying the same envelope. The only thing that changed was the amount of money people discovered he had. Mr. Whitaker gently tucked the envelope beneath his arm again before continuing. "Respect that appears only after money enters the conversation," he said quietly, "was never respect at all." Nobody inside the bank could even look at him now. The young teller behind the counter looked close to tears, while the security guards stood stiffly near the entrance, filled with embarrassment. Cynthia finally forced herself to speak. "Mr. Whitaker, please. We value your business here." The old man looked at her calmly. "No," he replied softly. "You value my money." The sentence landed harder than anything else that afternoon. Then, without anger or drama, Mr. Whitaker slowly turned and began walking toward the massive glass doors of the bank. Customers instinctively moved aside to let him pass, while employees silently watched him leave beneath the bright lobby lights. And standing there, surrounded by silence and panic, Cynthia Reynolds realized something painful. The most expensive buildings in the world still become very small places when people inside them lose their humanity.